Hello, beautiful people, and a warm welcome back to the Surrey Art School studio as we prepare to embark on cycle 3 of our autumn season theme, Migration. And as you can see, I'm surrounded by a flock of starlings. I'm pretty sure there's a name for that, but I will look it up and put it in the resources for you. I know that we have a resident population of starlings in the UK, and so you might find it a bit surprising that I decided to include them in the migration project, but there is a really important part of starling migration which also links to, I think, one of the most spectacular scenes that we'll see during the autumn and winter seasons, which is the murmuration of starlings. So yes, we have a fairly stable, although in decline, UK population of starlings. But in the autumn, we also have a whole load of other starlings that join us, European starlings, or that come from sort of the west. And I've included some maps of their movement in the resources too. But it is that migration of all those extra starlings that come to the UK in the autumn and winter, which is responsible for these huge nests, these huge flocks of birds that we see, and the incredible spectacle that is murmurations in the UK that we get to see in places like Brighton and in the West Country. So that population increase in the winter is quite significant. So for this sort of first part on starlings, I was hoping to sort of encapsulate everything I wanted to say about starlings in one cycle, but it turns out that's not been possible. So part 1 today is a step-by-step looking at a male starling in summer versus a male starling in winter, because they actually go through a sort of metamorphosis in terms of their plumage. So I really wanted to look at the two side by side today, and I wanted to go through sort of my version of a step-by-step watercolour study. Obviously it's watercolour, but with a little bit of ink, there's a little bit of white gouache, there's a little bit of experimentation with materials, but really just wanted to give you that chance to play with watercolours today, and the opportunity to play with some colours that we don't normally get the chance to with birds, because the colours on the starlings are just absolutely magnificent in summer and in winter, if you ask me. So this is part 1 today of probably a 2-part cycle. This first part just meeting with what a starling might look like in winter compared to in summer. And then in the next cycle, I want to use starlings as inspiration for sort of taking to the skies, for lifting off, for looking at sort of how birds look when they're in flight, how they look when they're in groups, and to just have a little bit of fun. So this is a slightly longer cycle today, and we'll have a slightly shorter cycle in cycle 4 just to make up for that, just to balance it out. But I can promise you that I have done about 20 zillion samples of these starling studies, which I'm going to share in the resources with you. And I really hope you just enjoy this process today. It's a very step-by-step process. It involves a little bit of patience, letting things dry, adding layers of resist and things like that. But it's just a good opportunity to explore some of the basic processes of watercolour, and also to explore some of the slightly different colours on our palette that we might not normally have the chance to use. So I'm going to keep it really short and sweet on my intro today, and just know that we'll come back in cycle 4 and we'll just use the starlings again as inspiration, but this time for looking at sort of how birds fly and flock and move. So sort of leaning in a little bit in this centre part of the cycle, but I really hope you enjoy the exercises that I share with you today, and do have a look at the resources for all the colours of the paints that I've used. You may not have exactly the same colours, but you should be able to recreate just from the colours in your pan palette a very similar effect to what I've created today using my slightly larger pan palette. So yeah, have some fun with this. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you enjoy learning a little bit more about starlings, and especially the winter visitors that arrive to create the beautiful flocks of birds that we see in these incredible scenes in the murmurations. So much love. Okay, my loves, so for this tutorial today, we're going to look at the difference between a winter and a summer starling. So as you can see, the plumage changes, especially on the males. Well, it is the males actually. In the males, the plumage changes between the winter and the summer. So in the summer, they have these really bright, beautiful breeding colours. And in the winter, their colours sort of dull down and they get loads more of these little white spots. So we're going to have a go at tackling both of these with some watercolour today. You're also going to need some white gouache. That's going to be useful for the spots. And I'm going to use a Pebeo drawing gum just to retain some of the light areas on the feathers. Now we need to simplify it with these birds because they appear quite complex. But if we just focus on the main shapes like we did in the last workshop, so the shape of the head, the shapes of these areas of different plumage, and then the belly, we should be able to get something that is a nice impression of a summer and a winter starling. And also it gives us the opportunity to play with some watercolours and perhaps even a little bit of drawing ink at the end. So there's lots of opportunities for us to play here, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on the sketching. So for this cycle, I'm going to recommend that you use either some carbon paper or some trace down paper like I've got here, just to get the main shapes down, and then it'll give us time to really get into the watercolour painting processes. So I'm going to trace these down now. I've just got the two quite big images for us to work from, and I've got some trace down paper here. I'm going to put my image on top and just draw around the main sort of headlines, shall we say, so that we can get cracking with adding some colour to these. So if you want to trace yours down too, or if you want to sketch, you can, using some of the processes that we looked at in the last cycle. And then I'll meet you back here with two bird outlines, one a winter and one a summer starling. Okay? Okay, so you can see my two birds really lightly traced down now onto some 300 GSM watercolour paper. Now, as I was saying before, it's really important that we simplify here, otherwise it's just a little bit too much for our poor little brains. So I'm using a Pebeo drawing gum here, and I'm just going to run it along the edge of some of these areas of plumage, just because I want them to stay light when I add the watercolour, okay? So you don't need to worry about the beak or the main bit of the body, and don't worry about the feet for now. I just want you to pop some little bits of drawing gum, and if you don't have drawing gum, you can use something like just a wax crayon like this. That works just as well. I just want you to put in the lines of the highlights on the edges of the wings. And again, you know, just simplifying as you go along here. So for example, and I will leave some notes on this. Here's my winter starling. And the main thing that I want to do is just work on a few hints of these highlights on the wing, okay? Don't worry about the body, don't worry about this area. We're going to do that with white gouache, but we just want to try and keep some areas light around the wing. So keep it general, okay? So my drawing gum is just giving me this blue fluid, and if I sort of press down like this, it comes out in really nice fine lines, which is what I need. So I'm just going to follow the edge of the wings. And this is the only area that I really want to stay light. I'm going to follow the edge of some of the wings here. It doesn't have to be perfect detail here. We just want that sense of those lines being cut in. And this all is going to need to dry before we start adding any paint to it. So make sure you're getting a nice fluid line with your fine liner. Remember that it's not about doing every single detail. Sometimes you've got to get it going again, and that's okay. Remember, it's not about doing every single detail. It's just about keeping some sense of those patterns when we add that colour on top. So I'm going to rework some of these where my fine liner wasn't really dropping anything down. And I'm going to add just a few here at the edge of the mantle as well. If you want to, you can add a few spots here too. But the rest of this, as I said, we're going to do as a top layer with white gouache. So you don't need to worry about all the spots. You don't need to worry about all the highlights. Okay? So we're going to do exactly the same thing on our summer starling over here. And the colours are not too different either. Okay? So let's just get my image. So leave the head, leave the beak. Don't worry about that. Just focus on these main areas where you've got that sort of light brown on the plumage. I've tried lots of different techniques with this, and this is the one that I feel works the best. But as I said, if you don't have a fine liner like this one, it is okay. You also want to go slowly. I'm trying to go quickly because I'm aware I've not got that much time. But if you go slowly, you'll get a nice clean line, a nice clean layer. And again, you can add a few spots if you want, just to the top, to the mantle, maybe some little V shapes, just to show the shape of that top plumage. But this is more about playing with and exploring colour today. So we just want to lay this base so that we can then be really free with our colour and the way that we put that down. So there we go. I'm going to say that is more than enough. Just a few lines, a few little marks just to separate one bit of plumage from the next. And I think we're good to go there. I'll just add a few more little spots and a few more little V shapes just to that top mantle area of the wing. So that's got to dry all the way down before we can add anything else to it. So you can take a little pause now, let that dry, and then we'll come back and we'll be adding some colour to it. So you're going to need your main colours from the subscription box, and then I'm going to be working with quite a few colours from my pan palettes, but namely just the blues and the greens. So you just need some blues and greens to hand, maybe a little bit of brown for this next part of the cycle, okay? So I shall meet you back as soon as these are dry, which will be maybe just a matter of minutes, okay? Okay folks, so the masking fluid takes about 5 minutes to dry, and when it's dry it's still a little bit sort of sticky feeling, so don't worry if it's a bit sticky. It's going to be a bit of drying time involved in this tutorial, so you're going to have to stop and make plenty of cups of tea as you go along. So we'll start with the winter starling now that that's dry, and we're going to just add, well, you can look at the colours actually, and this is what watercolour painting is all about really, is understanding what colours we're seeing. So we've got a very deep blue on the chest here, which our indigo is actually perfect for. And then we've got some hints of green across the top mantle here, and that you will have to look to your pan palette for, and we'll sort of just guesstimate those. And then we've got quite a lot of brown coming down towards the back of the feathers. So one of the browns off your subscription box will do really nicely for that. Probably this transparent brown oxide, because this one here is more of like a glaze, a granulating glaze, which we can chuck over the top. And actually this interference blue is going to be really useful for us here too. So let's start with this winter starling. We're going to wet him down first. So I just need a brush. There we go. Got some clean water here. And I'm not going to touch the beak and the eyes just yet. I'm just going to focus on the rest of the body. So I'll wet down his head. And it is a he. I'll wet down the chest. Let's get that all down first. And I'll go all the way down to the edges of the feet. The feet, we're going to do them just by sort of drawing them out from the rest of the body once it's a little bit more watercolory. So we're going to need a lot of indigo here for this part of our bird. And if you go over the edge, don't worry, you can always just lift up and dry it off. The great thing about watercolour is that it will only ever go where there's water. So that's really quite handy for us here. So don't touch the eye at all, just wet down the head and body, and then we're going to grab some of this beautiful indigo. We're really going to get that going. So we're really going to scrub it so it's nice and thick before we put it down. I'm going to pop it here. There we go, that's nice and strong. Just what we need actually. You can see why we needed to preserve our highlights first, because some of the colours are actually quite dark. I'm just using the brush to sort of move it. You can lift as well. You can sort of tilt and allow it to sort of soften and move down. You get some nice granulation from that. A little bit too much water here, so let me just lift a little bit out with my brush. There we go. And just allow that, or encourage it with your brush, to keep moving on down. As I said, we won't do the legs just yet, so just leave those. And it's going to need to go up, in and around the top of the head too, but not the whole top. I want something a bit lighter right on the top there. So just this area to begin with, just popping that down, letting it meld, letting it move a little bit. And where else is dark? Sort of the top of the head here is quite dark. So I'll add a little bit more there. And then I've got a few wings here that I want to pop in as well. So I'm going to do that in between that masking fluid fine liner. Just some little blue bits on the wings. And again, we want to do this in one layer really. So we want our paint to be quite thick and quite heavy. And you can sort of move confidently over those masking fluid areas now. And then a little bit more just at the top of the mantle here. Just going to pop that down now, leaving a little bit of a gap, a little bit of a highlight between the head and the body. And just reshaping that head a little bit. It looked a little bit out of sorts. Lovely. I love this sort of deep blue that we've got going on here. So in terms of a green, you can either add just a little bit of yellow to your indigo if you've got it, or I'm going to have a look at my palette here, and I feel there's like quite a bright greenish hue. I think we'll just go for this sap green here, mixed in with a little bit of the green alongside it, just to make it a little bit more vibrant fluorescent. So that's quite a nice colour there. And then that is going to go into these areas here. Just adding a little bit more greeniness. Into a few areas where I can see it, so I can see a little bit here as well, so I'm going to pop a little bit in there. Again, we're not aiming for perfection here, we're just experimenting and playing with our watercolours and relying on that sort of resist that we've put down to help save some areas that might end up getting a bit too dark. So just a few more little bits of green I'm dropping in there. Lovely. And then I'm going to go to my browns. So I've got this transparent brown oxide at the bottom. That'll work really nicely for this. And that I'm just going to add to the rest of these areas. In fact, I might mix it with a bit of indigo just to make it a little bit darker, because we know that we're going to be able to keep those highlights because we put the masking fluid down. Getting a little bit muddy here, but that's okay. It's just a base coat, and we'll build up from that base coat. Add a little bit more indigo there where I can see dark areas. This is the messy stage, okay? So just be comfortable with the messy stage, and a bit more of that transparent brown oxide. Just going to go right over the top here and blend into that blue that we've put on the top. And run a little bit more through there, because we're going to add different layers on top of this anyway, so it's okay if it moves a bit, it's okay if it bleeds a bit, okay? So it's quite dark, the winter starling, but we'll add lots of highlights with our white gouache afterwards. And again, this is just an experiment. We're just playing here. So that needs to dry really now. And just to sort of coordinate with the rest of the piece or the rest of the picture in terms of the colours I use, I was going to use some pink, but I think I'll just use a little bit of transparent brown oxide just to bring down the rough shape of the feet. And I'm sort of encouraging that down with a little bit of water so it's nice and light and loose. It's just a layer that we can then sort of start to build out the feet from if we want to afterwards, if we have time. I'm not sure we will have time. So this layer needs to dry completely, and this is why it's nice to have another study on the go at the same time. So I'm just going to pause and reset, and then I'm going to add a layer to the summer starling, and that'll be quite quick and probably feel a lot easier than the winter starling actually. So let's just go with that. So adding a few more little hints of brown before I stop adding colour to this. Just a few more little hints. Again, we just want the sense of the bird. We're not aiming for perfection here. We're just testing and playing with our watercolours, getting a bit experimental and starting to see if we can match some of those beautiful tones that we're seeing on the starling. So I'm going to pause now, reset. That'll give this one time to dry a little bit, and then we'll work on our summer starling. Okay, so whilst he's drying down, let's have a go at this summer starling. And if you look at the resource image, you can see on the head There are sort of blues that move into sort of purpley tones. There's some quite sort of turquoisey blues on the back of the sort of mantle, a little bit more purple down the base, and then again we've got this sort of indigo-y, bluey across the belly. Don't worry about the highlights here on this one, the browns. We're going to add those in afterwards because we've already blocked out the space to do that. So here we just get to have quite a lot of fun with our watercolours. So let's wet this bird all the way down first. So let's at least start with the head and the belly like we did before. We'll leave the beak. That goes into finishing touches territory. We'll leave the eye. That's finishing touches territory. And we'll just pull down, again, that same indigo blue across the belly, because that's a nice place to start with this, I think. And it starts to make us feel as if this bird is coming together quite quickly. So again, I'm going back to that indigo blue, or any dark blue that you've got in your pan palette is fine if you've run out of indigo already. And just popping that in. I don't want to fill the whole of the head because I want to add some purpley tones in there. And I'll make some suggestions as to what tones you might want to add there. So I'm just pulling this indigo down into the main belly. It's okay if it looks quite light at this time. I've wet it down so it's sort of enabling a little bit of mixing to happen, a little bit of texture to happen. Just really avoiding that beak and that eye at the moment. And then I want to get some more violet-y and sort of brighter tones into this summer starling study. So up here I've got a really nice violet colour. I think it's a cobalt violet. But you can use, again, whatever you've got in your pan palette. If you've just got a blue and you add a scarlet red to it, you'll get a violet anyway. So I'm going to go in quite pure with this purpley tone because this is what's going to create the iridescence. And if we look back to our image, you can see highlights on the back of the head and on the back of the wings here. So that's exactly where I'm going to add this violet. And it's going to be really bright, but that's okay because it's an underlayer, okay? So you don't want too much water. You want it to be nice and wet. Keep cleaning your brush so you don't pick up too much indigo. Yeah, lovely. It's quite strong, but the thing is with watercolour is it dries so much lighter anyway that I wouldn't worry about it going down too strong at this stage. If you've got a little bit too much colour down, then just get a paper towel, dry your brush, and you can pull away a little bit in some areas. So just around that eye is a little bit too strong for my liking. So I'm just going to pull that back a little bit and keep working this beautiful purpley tone into my piece. I'm going to pop a little bit down here as well, quite pure, just to try and maintain that colour. And again, we're not aiming for perfection here. We're just experimenting and playing. Got a little bit of a cooler blue that I'll sort of mix through, but you could mix through some indigo with this as well if you wanted to. And it's starting to come together. So it's just about playing with colour, this. I don't want to get too much into the particulars of the wings and the bird today. I just wanted to have a playful session with colour because we've done some quite tricky technical stuff so far. And then I have got in my palette a very turquoisey blue up here. It's a phthalo blue, which I'm going to use just for the top of the bird. But again, you just use what you've got to hand in your pan palette, or just substitute for just like a cobalt blue. And I'm going to pop that in there. It's so rare we get the chance to work with these really, really bright tones. So these I haven't really gone wet on wet. I've just been putting down a glaze. And then in some areas where it needs a little bit more shadow, I'm going to add a little bit of indigo to run through there as well. And that'll just sort of blend. So just laying that over the top just to create some little light shadowy tones. And that resist I've put down is pretty strong here. So you can see it sort of pushing away at the paint. So just adding some little shadows underneath or in between those wing shapes. And just sort of lost it a little bit here. So I'm just going to reshape the top of the head. And maybe add a little bit more indigo through the back there. There we go. So we really want these bright, vibrant colours to shine through in our later layers. So don't be afraid to be quite strong with this. I'm just going to take a little bit more of a mix of that violet and that purple just to add into these areas here. Lovely job. There we go. A little bit more of that turquoisey tone just through the top of the head. And just finish off around the shape of the eye. So just tidying up now once I've laid my main colours. And then all of that is going to need to dry all the way down. So can you see the difference already between these two birds? Again, like I said, this is not about creating perfect studies of starlings. They're pretty complex. It's about playing and exploring colour and, you know, even through the tracing process, we're still learning about things like plumage and the pattern of plumage. So I just wanted to introduce a bit of play today and see how that feels for you. And again, just to sort of be in keeping with the colours that I've already used on my piece, I'm actually going to just use a bit of that purple and add a little bit to the feet and then just pull out with some water just to create a sense of the direction of the feet, but nothing too perfect at this point. We haven't done much on feet yet, so you don't need to worry about that. How's that? Just have a bit of a play today. So both of these have got to dry all the way down before we can do anything else to them. So you can go off and make yourself a nice cup of tea if you like, but you're going to need probably a good 20 minutes to half an hour for these two to dry before we can work anything over the top of them. So let's just let them be for a minute and I will meet you back here and we can explore the next layer with these. So for the next layer, we're going to need your interference blue from your set that we sent you out at the beginning of term, maybe this burnt tiger's eye, and I'm going to recommend that you have some drawing ink and either a dip pen or just a very fine brush. So size one rigger brush would be absolutely perfect for this as well if you don't have a dip pen. Okay, and then finally you are going to need some white gouache, or if you've got white acrylic or something else like that, then please bring that to the next part of this. But go off, have a cup of tea, maybe have a little walk, go and see if you can see some starlings in your garden, and I'll meet you back here once all of this is completely dry. Okay. Okay folks, so you can see by the power of the sunshine that my studies are now dry, which is amazing. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to use just a little bit of a kneadable eraser just to remove very gently that masking fluid fine liner. So you need to be really careful with this and you need to make sure that your page is all the way dry, because otherwise you're going to end up with some ripping and tearing. So it's a little bit of patience to let these dry first. And then you should be able to come along with your eraser. I've tried rubbing with my fingers, but I find it a little bit problematic. I find it makes it quite dirty. So I'm just using my kneadable eraser here. It just makes it a little bit easier to remove that fine liner. Just got to make sure you've got really clean fingers if you're doing this by hand. The kneadable eraser just helps you to find the edges, and because it's quite gummy as well, it can help on any bits that are really stubborn. So just go over now with both of your studies and spend a bit of time removing that resist. If you've used wax, then you won't have to do this bit, so you can just skip on to the next bit. I'm going to do the rest of that off camera because it's a bit long, but you can see how it's leaving those lovely, lovely highlights for us, which is just what we needed. It's a nice, easy way of retaining some light so that we can still find the shape of those wings, which is really important. Okay folks, so you can see how well that resist technique has sort of managed to maintain some of the white, some of the light areas in the feathers, and that's sort of so much easier than trying to add that light in afterwards. That's why I wanted to do it at this stage. Do make sure you remove all of that masking fluid fine liner before you start working over the top, and it can be a little bit sensitive. So I started off with my kneadable eraser, and in the end I just went for this guy, and I really rubbed at some areas just to try and remove the last flecks of it. It's easy to put down, but just a little bit harder to remove. And then you may find that in the process of removing it that you lose a bit of definition in your colours. So if you want to go back at this stage and say grab a little bit more of your green and pop that into the top mantle of the wings, you can add that over the top now as a little glaze. Or if you wanted to take a little bit of indigo and just pop that back in those spaces between those gaps, then you can do that now. And even if you wanted to strengthen a little bit, just using some burnt umber or some of that transparent brown oxide, some of the areas at the base of the wing, you can go in quite strongly and do that now. And those highlights will still sort of maintain as long as you're careful with your painting here. So just a little oomph to those colours if they've gone a little bit light in the drying process. And then I'm going to ask you to use some of your interference blue here, and this is just a glaze, and we're going to pop a little bit on the chest, pop a little bit on the top of the head, and you can add little flecks of it as well, sort of, oops, went to the wrong colour. You can add little flecks of it as well into some of your blue paint, and that will just really give it a nice iridescent sheen. So that with the base colours that we've already put in will work really nicely, and you can do exactly the same with that interference blue on your summer starling. So I can add some here around the top of the head, over the top of that purple. It's particularly vibrant on darker tones, so I can add some here over the indigo, and I'm just popping that on quite loosely. And I can add some here as well, just on the mantle, and maybe some little flecks of slightly darker indigo running through there as well, just to get that sense of the separation between the wings. So those little white highlights are a really good guideline for sort of understanding where the feathers are still sitting, but we don't want anything too dark here, so a bit more interference blue with a bit of indigo just going onto those tail feathers. And then the rest of this we will sort of tidy up with some black ink. So we'll do that in a minute. Just adding that little sheen underneath is really nice. And whilst everything's dry, to be honest, this can also be a good time to add in the colour of the beak. So just need a little bit of lemon yellow from my palette, just to add a little hint of colour to my beak here. And similarly here, I'm just going to go for, well actually I think I'll do that one with ink, but I can pop it, I'll do the beak and all the rest of that with ink on that one, so I'll leave that one as it is. So just adding these little sheeny layers now and reinforcing areas where we might have lost a bit of definition. And then I will meet you back here once that little extra layer has dried for some finishing touches with the white gouache and with some ink. Okay folks, so we've just got a few remaining little things to do to finish off our birds now. What we need is just a little brownish tone to go over the tips of these wing edges. So this is actually a really nice colour, to be honest, or somewhere between these two tones. If we mix them together, we can then lay that on. I'm going to add that little highlight in over the top of those white areas. And don't worry if it's a bit messy at this stage, because we're going to run over and a little finishing layer of ink and then a little bit of white gouache just to finish these off. So I'm adding exactly the same tone to both of these, and this is just a very basic colour that you'll have on your pan palette anyway. I will put the colours in the resources. I find that hard to do when I'm in the middle of teaching, but I will put the colours on the resources. And can you see how that just gives that lovely little highlight, keeps that little highlight on the edge of those wings, which I think works really well for this. It doesn't look quite right unless you have that little brown tip to the edge of the wings. So I can do it quite loosely. We're still just hinting here. We're playing, we're exploring colour. Just adding that to the tips of some of those wings so that they stay a lot lighter than the rest of the study. So that was the whole point of putting that resist down at the beginning, is to then be able to work over the top of the tips of those wings. Everything's nice and dry, so it's going down nice and easily now. Just popping those in. And just sort of blocking any white spaces in, really. There we go. And even here, I'm actually going to tint some of those flecks back to brown, because that's what they're like on the actual picture of the bird that I'm looking at. Okie dokie. So that's all there really now for me. And then once that's in, I can start to actually work some black ink over the top. So I'm just going to work with my regular black drawing ink on this. And I'm going to use a rigger brush. I'm going to do pretty much exactly the same for both birds. So I'm going to start at the top, work over the top of those layers that I've just put down, just so that they show through, but sort of breaking them up now by adding some directional marks over the top. And I can sort of loosely outline some of my wing shapes here as well as I go, so I can add like these little V shapes. So it's a sort of painting come illustration, this. It's the best I could do to try and simplify what seems like quite a complex bird and give you the opportunity to have a play with some watercolours, but without losing some of those really important shapes. So where there's line, I'm just looking back at my image and adding some lines just to get that definition back between those different parts of the plumage. And then across the chest is an opportunity to really develop some mark making. And again, you can do this with a dip pen, you can do it with a rigger brush. You'll find that starlings are actually quite fluffy, especially when they're sort of squawking and speaking. So use the black to sort of cut away a little bit at the edge and make your bird a little bit more fluffy. I won't go too heavy on the top of the head because I want to add some white gouache there, but I can add a few little flecks in. And it's just that sort of showing the direction of the plumage, giving the eye a little bit of a hint as to what it's looking at here. And I can also now block in my eye, which I might just get a slightly smaller brush to do. You only really get one chance at this, don't you? So I'm just using a little size 0 brush now, just to work in the eye, leaving that little highlight that's so important. And then for the beak, I'm just going to wet it down just with some diluted ink to start with. I can always go over that with a dip pen afterwards. I just want to fill that space. I just want to darken a little bit around the area of the eye as well as it moves towards the beak. There we go. I'm just adding a little bit of extra ink to the beak just to really bring it to life. So we're very much in the finishing touches stages here. I'm going to let that go a little bit darker around this area as well. There we go. So just keep working your way back over the top with a dip pen or with a rigger brush, and just sort of getting some movement now after all those sort of flat layers, starting to get some movement, starting to get back the shape of some of those feathers that are sort of overlapping, but keeping this all very loose, keeping it like a sort of watercolour and ink sketch, I suppose, and just an opportunity to play with exploring some colour, some watercolour during this cycle. So he's there now really, he just needs some little white gouache dots to finish him off. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing with my summer starling here. So just really adding lots of nice directional marks over the top. I can also place my eye now. And again, just making sure I leave that highlight. I'm doing all this with the ink. And preserving that highlight is one of the most important things. So that's why we leave things like adding the eyes to the last minutes, because they are actually really crucial in making your bird look like a bird. So just keeping on working that ink all the way over the top, and then using it to also create some definition back into the shapes of the plumage as we go along. So sort of outlining very loosely with my brush some of those shapes and sort of bring them back into something that looks a little bit more 3D now. So you can take your time on this, sort of mindfully working your way over the top of that lovely iridescent base that you've created and adding a little bit of fluff to your studies. So I'm going to speed this up now, but I'll just carry on with this work. I'm just going to add a little bit of dark to the beak, just so we can see it a little bit better. There we go. So again, this rigger brush just enables me to be so fine with the way I'm adding this final layer over the top. So delicate, and really get some texture and movement into this study. I'll share all the different experiments that I've done for this cycle with you over on the resources, but just a little bit of extra tone on the beak really brings it to life. And just using this to sort of, as I said, loosely outline some of those feathers. And nice to see that little bit of light goldish hue sort of coming through. And don't worry if you accidentally go a bit heavy like I did there. It really doesn't matter. Just really loosely refinding those shapes in a sort of Quentin Blake sort of style, I suppose. I'm quite a loose artist, and so it's challenged me a little bit, these birds, because there's some areas that are just so precise. So the greatest sort of challenge for me has been to sort of try and simplify for you, find a way of creating some simple approaches for you to capture these beautiful birds, but no matter sort of what skill level you're at. So I will speed this up now. I'm going to keep working it up so you can see what I'm doing. Sorry, there's a little bit of shadow there, I do apologise. And I will meet you back once we have finished this little textured layer that we're now adding to our lovely little starlings, who I've got a deep appreciation for after doing this cycle. Okay folks, I keep saying finishing touches, but I promise these are the finishing touches now, the last little bits of this tutorial. So all we need is a little bit of white gouache now. I'm going to get some out. I'm actually just going to pop it on my paper. It's a little bit easier so you can see. And I'm just going to use a really tiny size 1 brush. So a really teeny tiny brush. I'm going to get that white gouache going. But I want to put it on quite thickly, so I don't want to add too much water to it. I don't want to water it down. Also, my water's a little bit blue, so it's not particularly helpful. So this is a finishing touch. You can pop the white gouache wherever you like, really. And this should just be a little meditative end to the cycle. So if we look at our winter starling, we can start to add some white gouache from the top of his head here. And we're just adding little dots and spots, and we're just going to work these little spots all the way back over the top of everything that we've done so far, working from the jaw. Can even add a little dot to the eye, just a little highlight there, working from the jaw. We don't want to mix this in too much with the paint that we've got underneath, so you need to make sure it's nice and dry. We're just going to pull that through now over the top, finishing layer. Just work your way all the way through to the bottom. If you want to add some little V's, some of these areas are a little bit not dry for me yet. You can just add those to certain areas of the body, but I'm just going to encourage you to dot and spot here. It's nice and calming to do. Just going back in and working that highlight there. And as I said, you want it quite thick. So nice clean brush, nice clean water, layered it on quite thick just to show that this is indeed a winter starling. So it is absolutely covered in these little white spots. So you just keep working your way through mindfully. If you want to add any extra little highlights to areas of the wings, you can do that now too. If you've lost some of your definition, but I don't think it's really necessary. I just want you to focus on adding these last little shapes over the top, and they don't have to be perfect, but they just give you that sense of that change in the plumage as our little starlings move from their beautiful, vibrant summer coat to their winter coat. So just a fun little exercise today. I know it's been quite intense. I know it's been most of the tutorial, but I hope you've enjoyed having a go at these beautiful, beautiful birds and getting to know them better through this process. You should have nice sparkly little birds now. Now if you want to, when this is dry, you could run over just a little bit of brown, just a little hint, over the top of those white spots just to make them look a little bit browner, but I'm not going to bother for this one. I'm just going to enjoy playing with the pattern of adding these little finishing touches to my study. And exactly the same for our summer starling. We've got quite a lot less spots, but we've still got some little V's on the chest. We've got some little flecks around the eyes and little flecks on the top of the mantle. So this is a great chance to add some of those back in, and it really does sort of give you the sense of the starling itself. So really just pressing really lightly with my brush, adding a few of these little final details. Don't really need to work with my eye because he's all right as he is, but adding some little flecks of white, just a fun little mindful repetitive task to really show that these are starlings and not any other bird. It just absolutely has been blowing my mind during this project, just like the artistry of Mother Nature. So adding these little V's here if you want to. Just the stunning array of different patterns that we can see on the plumage, and just the iridescence of these particular little birds really captured my heart. So I really wanted to have a go at doing them a la Ellie today. Not perfect, but just a little homage to the starling, who used to be so abundant in the UK. Sadly, like a lot of our birds that we're looking at during this project, they are in quite sharp decline, and I really hope that we can turn things around with our farming methods, with our approaches to some of the natural spaces that they occupy in order to give them a better chance of survival in the future. But my little ode to the starlings today, in a little step-by-step process for you, which I hope you enjoy too. So I'm going to stop there now, my loves. Lots and lots of information you'll find on the resources for these, and I just hope you've had fun with having a play with some watercolour in this way, having a sort of, attempting to capture the spirit of these really beautiful birds onto paper.